everybody, Ty here. I hope everyone is doing well. So, some interesting stuff going on here, especially with me looking at these observations right now. In case you haven't been outside, which I'm sure most of you have, it's actually been a pretty nice day for a lot of us over the lower 48. You can see that right now we got temperatures over pretty much the central and southern parts of the U.S. We're getting into the upper 60s, lower 70s, few 80s sprinkled in for right now. I would expect to see more of those over towards the desert southwest as the day goes on here. But as we continue to move forward here, we're going to really see a big change as we get later into the week and especially next week. In fact, it's such a change to where we're going to start to see the possibility of heavy snow beginning to come in towards not only the upper elevations around the west, but now we're starting to see Adirondacks, also the Poconos, and even the northern Appalachia getting into the action now. We've been talking about a big change in the weather pattern coming within the next week or so, and models have stayed pretty consistent with this. And now we're getting to the point where even the CPC is starting to double down on that and is starting to really cash in on that confidence now. Albeit at this point, it's only slight risk. I mean, we kind of already know the deal here with the mountains. It's not really too much of anyone's surprise that we're expecting heavy snow here possibly. And really for this area, it's not uncommon to see it. I'd say it's a tad bit early, but not unheard of. But the biggest thing that I wanted to talk about was the moderate risk that's been issued for below average temperatures over towards the deep south here. We're actually going to go ahead and zoom in on this so you can get a good look at it. But we have a slight and a moderate risk issued for below average temperatures exactly a week from now, actually. And this goes all the way up through the mid-Atlantic, through the Ohio Valley, and into the deep south, with the moderate risk going from the mid-Atlantic all the way to the southeast. So what this means is we're going to see significantly cooler than average temperatures over towards this area that's in this dash blue line here. So if you're in here, you definitely I definitely would urge you to consider bringing out those coats, those bigger jackets, because at least on this day alone, it's going to be considerably colder than usual. Now, one thing I want you to remember, though, is, as we've been saying for the November outlook, and if you haven't watched it, you can look at the link in the top right-hand corner, is that, well, this is going to be a month of pattern swings. What I'm really saying is it will be cold maybe for a couple of days, and then it's going to kind of warm back up. So be ready to layer up and layer down accordingly. And also do what you can to keep yourself insulated, and also in order to also prevent yourself from getting sick, because this is going to be the kind of month to test a lot of people's immunities. And then through all the changes here that we're going to be seeing with these air masses, severe weather is still going to be a thing. It's not going to be anything of major significance. Tomorrow is going to be a great example of that, where we have a wind and hail threat mainly over towards, let's say, the northwestern coast here, mainly around western parts of Oregon and also northwestern parts of Cali. But we also have to be watchful over towards the northeast. It's mainly going to be an isolated wind threat over here. But if we look at the tornado threat, look what we have here as well. Now, it's not that uncommon this time of year to see this happen over towards the western states. It's something that you should pay attention to over here. I don't think it'll be a significant tornado outbreak or anything like that, but a few tornado warnings could be up here. A few touchdowns wouldn't be ruled out as well. Now, again, as I mentioned before, during this time of year, we don't expect big outbreaks or anything like that. But with those mountains, anything is possible, especially if you end up being on the downslope. So we'll have to be watchful of the flow here. Not going to really go into heavy detail with this. If we do see an upgrade, we might make a follow-up video in the morning possibly. But if you're out towards the west, I wouldn't expect too much out of this. So no need to panic there. As we go through day 3 into day 4 through 8 outlook here, notice that, again, this kind of goes along with what we were talking about with that shifting of air masses here. We can expect maybe a couple more opportunities for severe weather. As the threat transitions, we may probably see a marginal to at most maybe a slight risk issue out towards the Gulf Coast states, maybe a little bit further up towards the north and into the Ozarks if we're lucky, but I wouldn't expect anything of major significance there. During this time of year, it's sometimes hard to even get so much as a rumble of thunder. So keep that in mind going forward. It's just really going to be more of a nuisance to you if you're planning to do something anytime during the week or weekend. Now, this is where things kind of get interesting to watch, especially if you're a weather nerd like myself. And the main thing we're going to be watching for with these shifting air masses, of course, is the ridges and the troughs. Notice that right now, whether you're looking at the GFS or the Euro at this point, notice everything's kind of a little bit more closer to straight line. This is allowing us to have some zonal flow. We have a slight little arch upward, so you could call this a ridge in a way. And as a result, this is why everybody's a little bit warmer today. Now, if we were to go ahead and move the GFS and the Euro forward, hopefully these will move, because the GFS doesn't like to respond from time to time. I don't know why this one always struggles. But if you look at the Euro here, we'll look at that one first, I guess, since it's the only one working. But you can see the troughing kind of occurring over here, and particularly around that 10th and 11th time frame, look at how this thing really deepens and drags that cold air into the equation here. Looks like the GFS isn't going to work. We'll have to probably do this one at a time here. But you can notice, whenever we get new one of these troughs to come in out ahead of it, we see the ridging. This is when we'll start to see those warm-ups occurring. And it really doesn't look like we start to see more troughing until the very end of the model run here, which, if you've been a long-time viewer, you already know my thoughts on that. But either way, though, like I said, it kind of backs up what we had been talking about in the November outlook at the beginning of the month, that this is going to kind of be one of those times a year where everything is a little bit topsy-turvy. It's going to be kind of hard to really keep your wardrobe in line with the weather, because the weather itself is kind of out of line. So just something to keep your guard up for as we're going forward. If you do have bad immunity, I would definitely suggest starting to stock up on those cough drops, throat lozenges, whatever you really need to in order to help keep yourself up and running. I just do not understand why it is that my GFS model is not working here. I just cannot get this thing to behave for me. I'm going to try this one more time so that way you can see everything. Because the GFS in particular towards that time frame a week from now, this is where things really get interesting. Because the Euro shows a little bit more of an aggressive scenario occurring where that trough really deepens and we get that cold air to come into play, which could result in more significant lake effect snow over towards the northern states, especially out towards east, like towards New York, for example. But if we actually see this scenario coming in from the GFS where the trough deepens, but it doesn't deepen quite as significantly, it's almost like these two somewhat merge in a way, or they end up phasing. We don't really see a whole lot of that in this case. Maybe towards the end it kind of does, but this might be a situation where we don't see as much snow because the moisture more than likely ends up outrunning the cold here. So very complex setup, looks like it's trying to take shape as we get into next week here. But outside of that, it looks just about the same as what we were seeing with the Euro. Still plenty of troughing coming in after the fact, even though it's not quite as strong. There might be another blast that tries to come in right at the end of next week as well. And then from that point, we start to see more ridging. So again, that just exactly what we're talking about, that sudden shifting of the air masses. It definitely seems like it's going to be the prominent theme throughout the month here. Because by this point, we're looking almost 16 days out. We're looking pretty much into the 19th, almost into the 20th at this range. And we're seeing a lot of consistency between both the models, at least as far as that's concerned. Now, of course, at this point, looking at more of the minute details at long range is a little bit more challenging. So it's going to be a little bit more of a niche type of deal trying to get down to the nitty gritty with that one. We might just have to wait and let the models kind of marinate there. So obviously it looks like GFS is not wanting to cooperate with us too easily here, so we'll have to try and finesse things as best as we can. But From looking at that map where we were looking at the troughing all the way to this map, which kind of points out what our air masses are looking like, it's again pretty much a similar deal. We can enjoy the near normal to slightly above average temperatures all the way up to the weekend here. And it's really from the 7th onward where we start to see that cold air mass begin to introduce itself here. If we look on the Euro, we'll see a pretty similar look there. Now, the Euro is going to end up moving a little bit faster, so it probably is going to catch up pretty soon. But notice, this is around the 9th. We have a pretty solid air mass that comes through, but it doesn't quite dig as far down to the south, and nor does it deepen. So, again, GFS scenario plays out. Probably we'll see maybe a little bit more snow over towards maybe Lake Michigan instead of Lake Erie. But with the more aggressive scenario with the Euro, which is just past the GFS, by the way, in the hour rate, you would probably seen it, and I'm going to actually pause it so you can see it. Look at how much further to the south this air mass makes it, and how far to the south it also deepens. This would favor more activity over towards Lake Erie in these areas as well. I don't think we would see quite as much aggression in regards to Lake Michigan, but I wouldn't rule it out at this point. But areas like Detroit might get a little bit less snow. It really is going to depend on which of these two models ultimately ends up winning out here. Again, we'll go ahead and take a closer look at this similar time frame here around the 10th, and notice it's completely different. And also I see a little bit more in the way of progression from this air mass also on the GFS in comparison to the Euro. This air mass also kind of looks like it's moving slower. So again, just another one of those more finite details that we're still trying to hash out at this point. We have just about a week to go, so a lot can change with this. Just something to remember going forward here. And another important detail to remember with this is as the air gets colder, typically we start to lose our moisture source. The moisture starts to dry out as the air gets colder. And if you have a stronger low pressure, sometimes that can actually bring more moisture in. However, it complicates things. It's like, let's say your moisture source of the Gulf, for example, that brings in Gulf moisture, which is warmer, so it brings warm air to the equation. So this is kind of gonna be the story when it comes to the weather for this year, when it comes to forecasting this year. We always try to break things down in a way to where you understand things pretty clearly over here, or we try to. So now that we're looking at the preset maps, at least it's moving a little bit more smoothly. So this is looking into the 10th and the 11th. Notice we see good bit of action over here in regards to the lake effect, and it's more consistent with this here. Now here is the 10th on the other screen here, and the lake effect action doesn't seem to be quite as long lasting with this. Then we start to warm back up towards the end of that run, and then as we go further along with this is where we start to see additional activity beginning to come into play. But of course, we're past the 300-hour mark at this point. So with the tale of the two models here, the things that I'm kind of picking up on, and I'm also paying attention to the severe weather threat for tomorrow, it mainly looks like it will be a linear event, but as those thunderstorms would crash onto the shore here, you never know. You could get a little quick spin up there as well. In fact, one thing that I'm kind of picking up on with the GFS here is with that faster progression here. Maybe it would be the 9th where we get a more interesting scenario with the winter storm possibly occurring over towards maybe even northern parts of New York. May dip a little bit further towards the south, but at this point, the jury's kind of still out on that at this point. So, like I said, there's a lot of moving parts with this forecast, a lot that you and I are both going to have to pay attention to going forward. So let's go ahead and keep things moving here, and we're going to go ahead now and take a look at the blend of models here. We're going to take a final look at what our exact snowfall could be over the course of the next 10 days here. Now, as I mentioned before, out towards the west, it's mainly going to be towards the mountains where we get the most action. The mountains could get smacked here pretty considerably, considering the fact that we're seeing some areas potentially getting up to as much as about 2 feet. This is mainly over towards the northwestern mountains around Wyoming, and then we also have Idaho getting into the action here, about 20 inches possible. Sierra Nevadas during this time of year, especially when you're in a La Nina year like this, or La Nina season, I guess you would call it in this case, it's not surprising to see these higher totals where we're getting up to about 1 to 2 feet here. And then, of course, over towards northern parts of Washington, we're going to get a lot of action here as well. Shift out a little further towards the east where we're getting that lake effect action. We're ranging right now between as much as 2 to maybe even half a foot of snow at this point. It's a pretty wide margin, but obviously looking this far into range, we're going to have that kind of issue. We're not going to have as much certainty, so much wider margin of error is likely. Same can be said over towards Lake Erie in particular. I think we're going to have higher totals here, about 6 to 9 inches. It seems a little bit more consistent here, so the confidence already seems like it's a bit higher here as well. If you're looking over towards some of the valleys over here towards the city, we could maybe get about an inch possibly over the course of the next 10 days. It's more than likely not going to be falling all at once here. Then over towards the Appalachia, we could be dealing with maybe 2 to 3 inches. I think most of that, if it's going to fall and accumulate, is going to be around that November 10th time frame. And if you're looking over towards the valleys over here, I wouldn't expect too much of anything. We're going to have too much in the way of warm air. We're not going to have enough moisture mixing in with any cold air to come in and create snow showers at this time from the looks of it. We'll be keeping an eye out and see if things change, but usually to get snow further to the south, you need a little bit more of a unique setup with that there. So just something else to pay attention to as well. This video ran a little bit longer than I expected it to, and I apologize for that, but I appreciate you all being here, and I will see you with another video very soon. Till then, everyone, take care. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.